Hello there, and welcome back to History to Relax. It's always a joy to have you here, whether you're settling in after a long day, looking for something soothing to drift off to, or simply curious about the quiet corners of history. Tonight, we're exploring a story that is as old as humanity itself, yet rarely spoken of, the history of sanitation. From the first villages to the marvels of Rome, from medieval streets to the space stations of tomorrow, this is the hidden history of how people have dealt with one of life's most universal needs. It's a tale that is humble, sometimes funny, sometimes sobering, and always deeply human. Before we begin, I'd love to invite you to gently tap the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and share your thoughts in the comments. Every little interaction helps this channel grow and reach more listeners who need a calm story to unwind with. So now, take a deep breath, settle into a comfortable place, and let your mind drift. It's time to relax as we begin the story of sanitation, civilization's hidden foundation. Part 1. Introduction: A Universal Story. When we think about history, our minds often drift to grand battles, glittering palaces, or the rise and fall of empires. We picture kings seated on thrones, armies marching beneath banners, or philosophers lost in deep thought. Rarely do we imagine what happened once those same kings, soldiers, or philosophers excused themselves from court, battlefield, or academy and sought a quiet place to relieve themselves. Yet the story of what came after that moment, the simple but universal act of letting go, is a hidden thread that runs beneath the entire fabric of civilization. Every human who has ever lived has faced the same necessity. Our ancestors, no matter their status, shared this daily ritual. Queens and shepherds, senators and slaves, inventors and farmers, all alike had to step aside, squat, or sit. In this way, waste is the great equalizer of human existence. It is rarely the subject of heroic tales or poems, and seldom do school children learn about it in classrooms. But if we peel back the surface of history, if we step into the quiet, shadowy corners of cities, villages, and palaces, we discover that sanitation has shaped the fate of nations as much as politics or war. The story begins at the very dawn of humanity, long before saws, long before flushing toilets, even before clay pots or wooden buckets. Picture the earliest humans, moving across open landscapes. They were wanderers, hunters, gatherers, people who carried little more than what they needed. For them, waste was not a problem to solve. The world was wide, the grass tall, the rivers flowing, and the forests deep. When nature called, they answered as all animals do, in the open air, leaving little trace behind. The earth absorbed what was left, the rain washed it away, and life continued without fuss. But something changed when humanity began to settle down. When people first built villages, when huts clustered close together, when fire pits were shared and granaries filled, waste began to linger. For the first time, our species had to think about what to do with what it left behind. The story of sanitation is, in truth, the story of cities. Without ways to manage what our bodies produce, no settlement could grow for long. And so, from the very first towns, from the earliest villages along rivers and fertile plains, human beings began to dig pits, carve drains, and invent rituals of cleanliness. Yet waste was never only a practical problem. It was also a matter of dignity. From the beginning, people sought privacy, shelter, and distance. There is something deeply human in the instinct to step aside, to find a hidden corner, to shield ourselves with stone, wood, or leaves. Archaeologists uncover ancient latrines and see not only the cleverness of early engineering but also the humanity of those who built them. A pit lined with stones, a seat carved from wood, or a channel that carries water. These were not only devices of necessity but also of comfort, modesty, and care. Of course, the absence of sanitation could bring terrible consequences. The story of waste is also the story of disease. Cholera, dysentery, and typhoid, words that still chill the spine, thrived wherever waste mingled with drinking water. Again and again, history reveals how invisible threats flowed silently through rivers, wells, and streets. Whole populations were struck down, sometimes without even understanding the cause. To study the history of sanitation is to glimpse the dark shadow that followed humanity at every step, the hidden danger beneath our feet. But sanitation is also a tale of ingenuity. Some of the greatest civilizations we know are remembered as much for their aqueducts, drains, and sewers as for their temples or monuments. Rome, with its Cloaca Maxima, built one of the earliest great sewer systems, carrying waste away from the heart of the city. The Indus Valley civilization, long before the glory of Greece or Rome, developed a network of drains and even private toilets, astonishingly advanced for their time. In China, human waste was not only a nuisance but a resource, gathered and returned to the soil as fertilizer, sustaining generations of farmers. Each solution carried its own story, shaped by geography, culture, and need. Where water was abundant, waste was washed away. Where land was fertile, it was collected and reused. Where cities grew too fast, it piled up until reform became unavoidable. The ingenuity of humankind was always tested by this most basic demand, and again, people rose to meet it. Yet progress was never steady. For every Rome with its flowing aqueducts, there was a medieval town where chamber pots were emptied out of windows into narrow streets. For every city that mastered sewers, another ignored them until stench and sickness forced action. Sanitation was a fragile achievement, often forgotten, neglected, or resisted. In many times and places, filth reigned where once there had been cleanliness. In this way, the story of waste is a story of forgetting and rediscovery, of lessons learned and lost. And it is not only a tale of the distant past. Even today, billions of people live without safe toilets, without clean water, without the simple dignity of proper sanitation. Modern skyscrapers may rise above glittering cities, but in other corners of the world, families still rely on pits, fields, or rivers. The divide between those who flush and those who cannot is one of the most striking contrasts of our time. The story of waste is not over. It is still being written, day by day. In this series, we will travel slowly through the hidden history of humanity's most universal problem. We will begin with early humans in the open wilderness, move through ancient cities with their drains and sewers, step into Roman latrines where senators sat side by side, and wander through medieval streets where waste flowed like rivers. We will smell the great stink of London, when the Thames itself turned foul, and listen to the cries of reformers who demanded change. We will watch the invention of the flushing toilet, marvel at the great sewers of the modern age, and finally glance into the future, into the toilets of astronauts orbiting above the Earth, and the composting systems of sustainable homes. This may sound like an odd journey, perhaps even a little absurd. After all, who wants to lie back at night and think about sewers and cesspits? Yet there is a strange comfort in following a story so ordinary, so universal, and so ignored. It is a reminder that beneath the splendor of kings and the power of empires, we are all human. It is a gentle unveiling of the hidden work that allowed civilization to rise. And it is, in its own quiet way, a tale of triumph. So let us begin this journey not with embarrassment, but with curiosity. Let us walk slowly, in no rush, as though down a quiet street at dusk. Let us pause at the doorways of history and peek inside, finding the secret places where humanity relieved itself, and in doing so, relieved the burden of survival. With each step, may we see how this most ordinary of acts shaped the destiny of nations. With each breath, may we remember that history is not only in the palaces and temples, but also in the drains, the pits, and the hidden corners of every settlement. This is the history of waste, the hidden foundation of civilization. And as we settle into this gentle exploration, we may find that the story is not repulsive, but strangely reassuring. For if even something so humble, so earthy, has carried us through ages of difficulty, then perhaps we too can face whatever challenges lie ahead. Part 2. Before toilets, early humans and nature's way. Long before stone walls rose, before the first cities spread across riverbanks, before the very notion of civilization was imagined, human beings lived as wanderers. They roamed in small groups, following herds, gathering berries, seeking shelter beneath trees or within caves. Their world was wide, their needs were simple, and their bodies were no different from ours today. And like us, they woke each morning, ate what they could find, and felt the familiar pressure that demanded relief. For these early people, waste was no problem at all. Nature itself offered an endless, open canvas. To step aside, crouch near a bush, or find a secluded hollow was all that was needed. The earth absorbed what was left, the rain washed it clean, and animals moved on. In this untamed world, there was no shame in the act, no worry about privacy beyond the instinct to find a quiet corner, and no fear of accumulation. A nomadic band left little behind, and whatever they did leave was swiftly reclaimed by soil and wind. We might imagine a small group pausing in the shade of a great tree. Some stretch out on the ground, others prepare a meal over the fire. Children play at the edge of the clearing. When someone feels the urge, they wander away into the underbrush. A moment later, they return, and nothing more is said. It was life's simplest rhythm. If the group moved camp a few days later, the ground would quickly erase the signs of their presence. This natural system worked well because of space. Vast landscapes meant that humans rarely crowded in one place for long. Waste was dispersed, spread thin across miles of wilderness, broken down by sun and soil before it could become dangerous. In this balance, nature managed everything with quiet ease. Disease from waste was rare in these small bands, not because they understood germs, they did not, but because their habits kept them safe without intention. Yet even in these earliest times, we can glimpse the stirrings of human awareness. Archaeologists have uncovered campsites where certain areas were clearly avoided. Just as animals mark territory, so too did humans learn, perhaps by smell or by bitter experience, that some spots were best left alone. The instinct to separate living space from waste space is ancient, older than language, older even than farming. And along with this instinct came the desire for privacy. Even in the openness of wild landscapes, there are signs that early humans sought seclusion. Some traditions tell of people shielding themselves with branches or turning away from the group. What began as instinct would, over thousands of years, evolve into modesty, ritual, and eventually the walls of private rooms. In those early days, the relationship between waste and the natural world was simple. Waste returned to the earth and, in time, nourished the plants that sustained the hunters and gatherers. The cycle was complete, unbroken, and sustainable. Modern eyes may view it as crude, but in truth it was a perfect harmony. Nothing was wasted, not even waste itself. But life was not without risk. For when groups lingered too long in one spot, when the earth grew heavy with what was left behind, sickness sometimes followed. Though they could not have named it, early humans must have sensed the danger. Perhaps they noticed that drinking water from a stream downstream of their camp made bellies ache. Perhaps they learned that it was safer to move on than to remain where filth gathered. This knowledge, though unspoken, shaped the patterns of migration and survival. Over time, customs grew. Some groups chose certain areas, far from the center of camp, as their bathroom grounds. Others preferred riversides, where water carried away what was left. Still others used fire pits not only to cook food but also to burn what could be burned, a primitive effort at sanitation. These small practices reveal a truth. Even before civilization, humans were already shaping the world to separate the clean from the unclean. And there was also ritual. In some ancient cultures, traces remain of symbolic acts tied to waste. Burying it beneath earth or sand was not only practical but also carried meaning. To cover what was left was to close it off, to hide it, to show respect to the land. What began as instinct slowly became culture, and culture carried memory forward. The sounds of that world were different from ours. No rushing of pipes, no gurgle of saws, no flush of porcelain. Instead, there was the rustle of leaves, the splash of a river, the sigh of wind in tall grass. The act of relieving oneself was woven seamlessly into the rhythm of daily life, a pause as natural as drinking or sleeping. There was no embarrassment, for there was no separation from nature itself. We can imagine the smells as well. Not the foul stench of cesspits or crowded streets, but the faint, earthy odor of something quickly absorbed by soil. A breeze would carry it away. A rainstorm would cleanse the ground. In the vastness of open land, nothing lingered for long. This balance endured for tens of thousands of years. It shaped human comfort, health, and even movement across continents. Waste management, if we may call it that, was simply part of living lightly on the earth. For as long as people moved with the seasons, as long as camps rose and fell like tents in the wind, sanitation remained simple, effortless, and effective. But change was coming. As human beings discovered the art of farming, as they began to settle near rivers, as villages sprouted and grew into towns, the old balance began to shift. For the first time, waste piled up faster than the earth could absorb it. For the first time, people stayed long enough to notice the dangers of their own presence. What had once been absorbed by wilderness now lingered in backyards and paths. This moment, the shift from nomad to settler, was the true beginning of sanitation history. It was the moment when humanity had to confront what it left behind, not once in passing, but every day, in the same place. And it was in this moment that the need for pits, drains, and rituals of cleanliness truly began. As we leave behind the wandering bands of early humans, with their simple balance of life and nature, we step into the age of settlements. We will walk through the narrow lanes of the first villages, where huts huddled close together, fires burned low, and the air was thick with smoke and smell. We will see how the ground beneath those villages changed, how pits were dug, and how the first true solutions to the problem of waste began. But for now, let us pause in the wilderness, in that simpler time when life and land moved in harmony. Let us breathe in the silence of open plains, the endless horizon, the river flowing clear. In that silence, waste was no burden, no challenge, no threat. It was simply part of the cycle of life, absorbed, erased, and renewed. The story of sanitation may grow more complicated as cities rise, but here, at the beginning, it was as simple as stepping aside beneath the trees. Part 3. The First Settlers, when waste began to pile up. Human history changed forever when people began to stay in one place. No longer did families drift endlessly across plains or follow herds into the distance. Instead, they planted seeds, raised crops, built huts, and began to call certain patches of earth home. This was the birth of settlement, the first step toward villages, towns, and cities. And with it came one of humanity's earliest unspoken problems: what to do with the waste left behind when no one moved on. At first, it seemed harmless enough. A family might build a hut of mud and reeds beside a river. When nature called, they walked a short distance away, crouched in the grass, and left their mark. The river carried things downstream, the soil absorbed what it could, and life went on. But as huts multiplied, as fires burned in many hearths, as children played in narrow lanes, waste began to collect. The same spot was used again and again. Pits filled, the ground soured, and the air grew heavy with unpleasant odors. What was once a small act scattered across wilderness became, in close quarters, a growing hazard. Imagine a settlement of perhaps 100 people clustered near fertile soil. They shared fields, tools, and stories. But each day, those same 100 people also left behind what their bodies no longer needed. There was no moving camp, no endless wilderness to erase their presence. The waste remained, creeping ever closer to where they ate and slept. This was the beginning of a new awareness. For the first time, people had to think about waste not as something that vanished into nature, but as a problem that stayed. Early solutions were simple. Some groups dug pits near their huts, shallow holes covered over when full. Others carried waste to the edge of the village and left it in heaps, far enough away that the stench did not overwhelm daily life. Still others sought water, tossing refuse into rivers or streams, hoping the current would take it away. Of course, these methods were crude. Pits overflowed in heavy rains. Heaps attracted flies and animals. Rivers that carried waste downstream often carried it back again, contaminating water supplies. But slowly, almost without realizing it, humans began to invent sanitation. Not in the form of stone saws or porcelain toilets, but in the practice of separating living space from waste space, of digging deeper pits, of finding better drainage. Archaeology offers glimpses of these first efforts. At sites thousands of years old, researchers find shallow ditches lined with stones, channels carved to lead water away, and areas clearly set aside for dumping. In some villages, waste was mixed with ash from fires, a practice that helped dry it out and reduce the smell. In others, it was buried beneath layers of soil, an early echo of composting. But where waste management failed, danger followed. Disease lurked in stagnant pools, in flies buzzing from heap to hearth, in wells dug too close to dumping grounds. Though they knew nothing of bacteria or viruses, people must have sensed that sickness followed filth. Perhaps they noticed that children grew ill after drinking from certain spots. Perhaps they learned to avoid certain corners of the settlement where odors hung thickest. Bit by bit, wisdom was gathered, passed down not in words of science but in habits and warnings. There was also the question of modesty. As families lived side by side, as settlements grew closer, the instinct for privacy deepened. To relieve oneself in the open became uncomfortable. People sought screens of reeds, corners of huts, or little enclosures of wood or clay. Privacy was no longer just instinct, it became expectation. This was the seed from which walls, doors, and eventually entire rooms dedicated to the act would grow. Still, these early people lived far closer to their waste than we would ever tolerate today. The smells of daily life were thick, smoke from fires, sweat from work, and the ever-present reminder of what lay in the pits and ditches beyond the huts. To walk through one of these settlements was to walk through a world alive with odors, some pleasant, some less so, all part of the rhythm of existence. And yet, in this mess, something remarkable was happening. By confronting the problem of waste, humans were beginning to build the foundations of community health. Each pit dug, each ditch carved, each corner set aside was a step toward understanding that survival depended not only on food and shelter but also on cleanliness. Without it, villages sickened and sometimes disappeared. With it, they endured and grew. We can picture life at dusk in one of these villages. The air is filled with the crackle of fires. Families gather outside their huts, eating from clay bowls. The fields beyond are quiet, shadows long. Somewhere, at the edge of the village, a ditch runs, carrying water and waste away. It is not perfect, but it is enough. In that ditch lies the first faint outline of the source that would one day carry the waste of millions. As agriculture spread, as villages turned to towns, these lessons spread with them. Different cultures devised different methods, shaped by their landscapes. In dry regions, waste might be buried in sand. In wetter lands, it was washed away with water. Where rivers were plentiful, they became both lifeline and dumping ground. And in each case, the solutions reflected not only necessity but also belief. Ideas about purity, pollution, and the unseen dangers that seemed to rise from foul smells. This was the birth of sanitation as we know it. Simple, crude, imperfect, but profoundly human. It marked the first moment when humanity realized that what we leave behind must be managed if we wish to remain where we are. It was the first step from nature's effortless cycle into the messy, inventive world of civilization. As we leave these first settlements, we prepare to step into the more ambitious worlds of early civilizations. We will walk along the stone-paved streets of the Indus Valley, marvel at drains running from house to house, and see toilets that seem shockingly modern for their age. But let us not forget the humble pits and ditches of the first villagers. For in their crude efforts, the foundations of sanitation were laid, a quiet, unglamorous achievement, without which cities could never have risen. Part 4. The Indus Valley, Ancient Innovation. Long before the gleaming marble of Rome or the proud columns of Athens, another civilization quietly flourished on the banks of the Indus River. Nearly 5,000 years ago, in what is today Pakistan and northwest India, cities rose with straight streets, carefully measured blocks, and homes built of baked brick. These were not the chaotic villages of earlier times, huddled together without plan. These were ordered, deliberate creations, laid out like vast chessboards across the plains. And beneath their streets, flowing unseen in darkness, lay one of humanity's earliest marvels of sanitation. The Indus Valley Civilization, sometimes called Harappan after one of its great cities, astonishes archaeologists even today. While other peoples struggled with piles of refuse and shallow pits, the Harappans built drains, sews, and toilets that would not seem entirely out of place in a modern town. In these cities, waste was not merely tolerated, it was managed with foresight and care. Imagine walking along a street in Harappa or Mohenjo-Daro, two of the great cities of this world. The road beneath your feet is straight, paved with brick, stretching in neat lines toward the horizon. On either side rise rows of brick houses, some simple, others with 2 stories and courtyards within. And along the edge of the street, running quietly beside the walls, is a covered drain. Beneath the slabs of stone or baked clay, wastewater flows away, guided toward larger channels that eventually lead beyond the city. Step inside one of the houses, and you may find a small room set aside for bathing, its floor carefully sloped so that water drains into a pipe. In some houses, archaeologists have found what appears to be an early toilet, a raised platform with a hole, connected to a drain. Into this drain, water could be poured to wash waste away. It is startlingly familiar. 5,000 years ago, families already sought the privacy and comfort of dedicated spaces, already dreamed of waste carried off by flowing water. What makes this so extraordinary is not only the technology itself but the scale. These were not the luxuries of kings or the private comforts of the wealthy alone. The drainage system extended throughout the cities, serving rich and poor alike. Public wells offered clean water, and nearby drains carried away what was left. It seems that sanitation, for the Harappans, was not a privilege but a shared foundation of urban life. How did they achieve such planning? The layout of their cities suggests a remarkable level of civic organization. Streets were aligned with precision, running north-south and east-west. Blocks were measured, homes arranged with uniformity. To build drains beneath such streets required not only labor but vision, the belief that waste, unseen but ever-present, must be carried away if the city was to thrive. In the silence of archaeological ruins, we can almost hear the faint gurgle of water slipping through covered channels. We can imagine women pouring used water from cooking or washing into the street drain, knowing it would be carried away. We can picture children playing near wells, dipping buckets into cool water, while waste vanished beneath their feet. It was a harmony of design, where cleanliness was built into the very bones of the city. And yet, despite all we know, much remains mysterious. We cannot read the Harappan script. Their written records remain undeciphered. We cannot ask them why sanitation held such importance. Did they link cleanliness with health? Did they see purity as spiritual as well as practical? Or was it simply necessity, learned from bitter experience, that taught them to carry waste away from where they lived and ate? Whatever the answer, their achievement is undeniable. While other parts of the world endured foul heaps and stagnant ditches, the people of the Indus Valley built something closer to the systems we know today. It was not perfect. No ancient system could be. Waste was still dumped eventually into fields or rivers beyond the city, where nature took its slow course. But the daily experience of life within the walls was cleaner, safer, and far more organized than in many later civilizations. Consider the contrast. Centuries after Mohenjo-Daro thrived, medieval cities in Europe would still hurl chamber pots out of windows, filling streets with filth. In London of the Middle Ages, narrow lanes reeked with sewage. Yet here, thousands of years earlier, a civilization already understood that drains must be covered, that water must flow, that waste must be hidden and carried away. In this sense, the Indus Valley was not behind but astonishingly ahead. The story of their sanitation also reminds us of fragility. For no civilization, however advanced, is eternal. Around 1900 BCE, the Indus Valley cities began to decline. Perhaps it was changing rivers, perhaps climate shifts, perhaps invasion or disease. Slowly, the drains fell silent, the bricks crumbled, the water dried. By the time other civilizations rose to prominence, the Harappan systems lay buried, forgotten beneath dust and earth. For thousands of years, their brilliance remained hidden, only to be uncovered by archaeologists in the 19th century. Today, standing among the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, one can look down into those ancient drains, trace the lines of brick, and sense the echoes of running water. It is humbling. Modern engineers admire the clarity of their design. Visitors marvel at how ordinary people, 5 millennia ago, lived in cities where waste was guided away from homes and streets. The Indus Valley reminds us that history is not a straight line of progress. Sometimes, what is lost is rediscovered much later. The world would wait centuries before saws of such sophistication appeared again. But here, in these early cities, the principle was already clear. To live together in great numbers, sanitation is not optional. It is as vital as food, as vital as shelter, as vital as the walls themselves. And so, as we leave the quiet ruins of the Indus Valley, we carry with us the image of straight streets, brick drains, and water flowing unseen. It is a gentle reminder that beneath every city lies a hidden life, the unseen rivers that carry away what we no longer need. Without them, civilization falters. With them, it thrives. From here, our journey will flow toward other ancient worlds, to the deserts of Egypt and the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, where waste was managed in different ways, with jars, sand, and early drains. But no matter where we walk, we will remember that in the Indus Valley, long ago, humans first dreamed of cities that stayed clean, and in that dream laid one of the cornerstones of civilization. Part 5: Egypt and Mesopotamia, Sand, Clay, and Early Drains. When we think of the great river civilizations, we imagine pyramids rising in the desert sun, or towering ziggurats stretching toward the heavens. We think of pharaohs clad in gold, or kings of Mesopotamia carving laws into stone. These were societies of splendor and scale, built upon the steady gifts of rivers, the Nile in Egypt, the Tigris and Euphrates in Mesopotamia. Yet beneath the grandeur, in the quiet corners of daily life, people still faced the same humble problem. For all their monuments, they too had to find ways to manage what their bodies left behind. The landscape itself shaped their answers. In Egypt, where the land met desert, sand was everywhere. Dry, shifting, and abundant, sand became the simplest means of covering waste. To relieve oneself outside was common enough, but to bury the evidence beneath a layer of sand kept both dignity and distance. In villages, pits were dug, and waste was hidden away in earth that dried quickly beneath the sun. The dry climate slowed decay but also limited the spread of disease. Though not advanced compared to the marvels of the Indus Valley, these practices worked well enough for centuries. Within homes of the wealthy, archaeologists have found something more refined: simple clay jars, used as portable toilets. Servants might carry them away, emptying them into larger pits or into the river. These jars, often lined with sand, were early echoes of the chamber pots that would one day become common in Europe. They offered privacy within walls, sparing elites the discomfort of venturing outdoors. In grand palaces, where walls enclosed courtyards and columns framed gardens, one can almost imagine such jars discreetly placed behind curtains, unseen but essential. Along the Nile itself, water offered both blessing and danger. The river sustained Egypt, flooding each year to leave behind fertile soil. It also carried away waste tossed carelessly into its current. Villagers might empty jars or basins into the Nile, watching the water sweep everything downstream. It was convenient, but it came at a cost. The same water was used for drinking, bathing, and irrigation. What vanished downstream for one village returned upstream for another. The spread of disease was a risk, though not always understood. Still, the great river absorbed much, its wide current dispersing what it carried. In Mesopotamia, where rivers crisscrossed fertile plains, practices were more varied. Here, too, clay jars were used, along with pits dug near homes. But Mesopotamians also developed drains in some urban areas. Archaeologists in cities such as Ur and Babylon have found evidence of clay pipes and channels carved to lead water and waste away from houses. In wealthier households, small brick-lined rooms with drains have been uncovered, suggesting early bathrooms. These were not as sophisticated as the covered sores of the Indus Valley, but they reveal a growing awareness that cleanliness mattered in crowded cities. One of the most striking finds comes from the Palace of Knossos in nearby Crete. Though not Mesopotamian, it shows how early Mediterranean cultures experimented with sanitation. There, archaeologists discovered a system resembling a flushing toilet, where water could be poured to carry waste away. Though rare and limited to the elite, such inventions remind us that even in the ancient world, comfort and privacy were sought with surprising creativity. Back in Mesopotamia, another layer of meaning was added. Waste became tied to ritual and purity. The peoples of the region believed in unseen forces, gods who shaped destiny and spirits who lingered in corners of daily life. Cleanliness was often linked with holiness. Bathing rituals were common, and to remove filth was to show respect to both self and deity. Though these rituals were primarily about water and washing, they suggest an awareness that what was unclean had power and must be managed carefully. Daily life, however, remained practical. In crowded quarters, chamber pots or jars were the simplest tools. Servants or family members carried them to designated spots, where waste was dumped, sometimes mixed with earth or ash. Streets may have carried their own odors, but the presence of drains and channels meant that, in some cities, filth was at least directed rather than left to spread. It is tempting to imagine the contrast. In the heart of Babylon, mighty walls towered, gardens hung with greenery, priests chanted before towering ziggurats. Yet in the same city, behind modest doors, families still relied on clay jars filled with sand. A servant carried them away, perhaps at dawn, perhaps under cover of night. The greatness of empires rested on the simplest of daily labors. The dry climate of Egypt and the fertile plains of Mesopotamia gave different solutions, but both reveal the same truth. Civilization cannot flourish without some answer to the waste of daily life. Pharaohs may have claimed divinity, but they still relied on sand, pits, and jars. Kings may have carved their laws in stone, but they still built drains to guide waste away. Beneath the crowns and temples, the ordinary rhythms of survival continued. What makes these practices important is not only their practicality but also their influence. The Egyptians and Mesopotamians set patterns that would endure for millennia. The chamber pot, the pit, the river, all would return again and again in human history. They remind us that while some civilizations soared briefly ahead, like the Indus with its saws, others relied on simpler but enduring solutions. As we walk through the ruins of an Egyptian village, or along the remains of a Mesopotamian street, we may see only broken jars or shallow pits. Yet in these fragments lies the daily life of millions. These were the tools that allowed dense populations to survive, that allowed cities to rise, that allowed temples and palaces to be built. Without them, waste would have overwhelmed even the mightiest king. So let us pause to imagine an evening in ancient Egypt. The sun sets over the Nile, painting the water gold. Farmers return from the fields, carrying baskets of grain. Children chase each other in the dust, their laughter carrying on the wind. In a quiet corner of a house, a clay jar waits. Later, it will be emptied, its contents carried away beneath the stars, perhaps to the river, perhaps to a pit. The cycle continues, unnoticed but essential. And let us picture a dawn in Mesopotamia. The city stirs, smoke rising from hearths. A woman pours water from a jar into a small drain, watching it vanish. Nearby, her husband empties a clay pot into a pit, covering it with soil. The streets smell faintly of earth, smoke, and something less pleasant, but life goes on. Above them, the ziggurat towers, priests climb its steps, and the city hums with trade. Yet beneath it all, drains carry away what no one wishes to see. This is the hidden side of the great river civilizations. While monuments reach for the sky, their foundations are secured in the ground below, where sand, clay, and early drains kept daily life bearable. Without these simple acts, the splendor above could not stand. From here, our journey will carry us westward, to a land where engineering and ambition met on a scale rarely seen before. In Rome, water would be channeled with breathtaking precision, saws would grow vast, and public latrines would seat dozens side by side. But before we step into those marble halls, let us remember the clay jars of Mesopotamia and the sand pits of Egypt. They may seem humble, even crude, yet they were the quiet beginnings of a story that would one day lead to the roar of rushing water beneath the streets of empire. Part 6. Rome, the Cloaca Maxima and public latrines. Among all the civilizations of the ancient world, few have captured the imagination like Rome. Its legions marched across continents, its aqueducts soared across valleys, its laws still echo in modern courts. Rome was a city of spectacle and scale, a place where emperors commanded arenas filled with tens of thousands of cheering voices. Yet beneath the grandeur, below the marble and stone, another world hummed with a quieter rhythm, a world of drains, saws, and public latrines. For if Rome was the heart of empire, the Cloaca Maxima was its stomach and bowels, carrying away what the city no longer needed. The Cloaca Maxima, or Great Saw, began in the 6th century BCE, when Rome was still a modest city on the banks of the Tiber. The valley between its early hills was marshy, prone to flooding, and thick with stagnant water. King Tarquinius Priscus, one of Rome's legendary monarchs, ordered a massive drainage system. What began as a channel to dry the land became, in time, a saw of astonishing scale. Built of stone blocks fitted without mortar, arched high enough to walk through, the Cloaca Maxima endured for centuries. Some parts, remarkably, still exist today, water flowing through them as it did in ancient times. Imagine descending into the cool, damp air of this great channel. Above, the roar of the forum hums with senators, merchants, and priests. Below, in shadow, water mingles with waste, rushing toward the Tiber. The stones are slick, the air thick, but the structure itself is strong, unyielding. Roman engineers had created not only a saw but a monument to practicality, a hidden foundation without which the city could not have survived. The Cloaca Maxima was more than drainage. As Rome grew, it became the central artery into which countless smaller drains and pipes flowed. Rainwater from streets, refuse from markets, and waste from latrines all found their way into its channels. It was not glamorous, but it was essential. Without it, Rome's crowded streets would have become unbearable, its people sickened, its empire perhaps weakened. But Rome's genius in sanitation was not limited to saws. The city also built aqueducts, vast channels carrying fresh water from distant springs into the heart of the metropolis. These aqueducts fed fountains, baths, and even private homes of the wealthy. Water flowed constantly, a marvel of engineering that astonished visitors. And where water flowed in, waste was carried out. This was Rome's secret, to marry abundance with disposal, to balance what entered with what must be removed. Nowhere was this more visible than in the public latrines. Step inside one of these facilities, and you would find long benches of stone, each with holes carved at regular intervals. Beneath ran flowing water, carrying waste away into the saws. Another channel at the feet provided water for cleaning. Privacy was absent. Men sat side by side, talking, gossiping, even conducting business as they relieved themselves. What might seem embarrassing to us was, for Romans, simply another part of civic life. To visit the latrine was to enter a space of conversation as well as necessity. Beside each man lay a curious tool, the tussorium, a sponge attached to a stick. Dipped in water, it was used for cleaning after use. Shared among many, rinsed in the same channel, it may make modern stomachs turn. Yet it was practical, and it reveals how Romans accepted waste as part of communal life. What mattered was not hiding the act, but managing it effectively. These latrines could seat dozens at once, and some archaeologists believe they were decorated with mosaics and frescoes. Even in this humble setting, Rome sought beauty. Imagine sitting upon cool stone, talking with a neighbor, as images of gods or patterns of color surrounded you. Outside, water roared in aqueducts. Beneath, waste rushed through saws. All was connected, a hidden web supporting the daily rhythm of empire. Of course, Rome was not without filth. Not every street was connected to the Cloaca Maxima. Not every home had drains. In poorer districts, Chamber pots were still emptied from windows, refuse piled in alleys, and the stench of humanity mingled with smoke and sweat. Yet the difference was scale. Unlike so many ancient cities, Rome had a system, a plan, a vision. It sought to control what could never be eliminated, to order what was by nature disorderly. The impact on health is difficult to measure. Romans still suffered from disease. Water was not always clean, and sores often carried as much danger as protection. Yet the very effort marked a turning point. Rome understood that greatness required hidden foundations. Roads and armies could not alone sustain an empire. Drains and sores were equally vital. The presence of sanitation also shaped Roman culture. Bathing became a central part of life, with great bathhouses offering not only cleanliness but leisure. Water flowed endlessly, warm pools and cold plunges waiting for citizens rich and poor. In these baths, cleanliness and social life mingled, just as in the latrines. Waste was not merely managed, it was woven into a culture that valued order, abundance, and spectacle. Even religion touched sanitation. Cloaca, a minor goddess, presided over the Cloaca Maxima itself. Shrines to her stood in the Forum, a quiet acknowledgement that even the sore deserved divine guardianship. In this way, Rome sanctified the act of disposal, turning necessity into ritual. The goddess of the sore stood beside the gods of war and law, reminding all that cleanliness and survival were matters of faith as well as engineering. Walking through Rome, the signs of sanitation were everywhere. Fountains bubbled with clear water. Drains cut into stone streets carried refuse away. Latrines welcomed citizens into cool chambers of stone. Beneath it all, the Cloaca Maxima flowed ceaselessly, a dark river beneath the city's shining face. It is tempting to smile at the thought of senators and generals sitting side by side on stone benches, debating politics while using a sponge on a stick. Yet this very image shows Rome's practicality. Waste was not shameful, it was ordinary. And by treating it as ordinary, Rome managed it better than almost any civilization before it. The endurance of Roman sanitation is perhaps its greatest achievement. When the empire fell, much of this knowledge was lost. The great aqueducts fell silent, the latrines crumbled, and cities once connected to sores returned to cesspits and filth. Medieval Europe, centuries later, would live amid conditions far worse than those of Rome. It would take over 1,000 years before cities again achieved what Romans had once considered ordinary. Today, parts of the Cloaca Maxima still function, water rushing through ancient stone. Tourists may walk above, unaware of the channel flowing beneath. Yet without it, Rome could not have endured. The Forum, the Colosseum, the Palatine Hill, all depended on this hidden system. The empire was built not only on armies and law, but on the steady, silent flow of water and waste. So as we pause in the shadow of the Forum, listening to the distant echoes of voices long gone, let us remember the hidden river below. Let us imagine the conversations in the latrines, the hands dipping sponges into running water, the engineers carving stones into arches that would last 2 millennia. This was Rome's other triumph, not sung by poets, not carved on triumphal arches, but enduring all the same. From here, our journey will carry us eastward, into another civilization with its own answer to waste. In China, waste was not only a nuisance to be carried away, but a resource to be gathered, treasured, and returned to the earth. While Rome flushed its filth into rivers, China transformed it into fertility. And in this, we will see another side of humanity's endless dance with what it leaves behind. Part 7. China, Night Soil and Fertility. If Rome's genius lay in flushing waste away, China's brilliance was in keeping it close. For thousands of years, across the valleys of the Yellow and Yangtze rivers, Chinese farmers understood something that others overlooked. What the body discards can, with care, be returned to the soil to feed the crops that sustain life. Where some civilizations saw only filth to be hidden or washed away, China saw a resource, and in that vision lay one of the quiet foundations of its extraordinary endurance. The Chinese called it night soil, a polite phrase for the human waste collected each evening, carried in buckets, and spread upon fields at dawn. To modern ears, the idea may seem unpleasant. Yet for centuries, it was a system of astonishing efficiency. It fed rice paddies, wheat fields, and vegetable gardens. It allowed dense populations to thrive on relatively small patches of land. And it created a cycle of nourishment that bound body, soil, and food into one continuous rhythm. Picture a farming village along the Yangtze, perhaps 1,000 years ago. The day has ended, the sun sinking low over terraced hills. In the narrow alleys between houses, men and women carry wooden buckets, dipping them into pits or jars where families have relieved themselves during the day. The buckets are heavy, their contents sloshing. By moonlight, the farmers walk out to the fields, spreading the waste across the soil. By morning, the earth will have absorbed it, and by season's end, the crops will rise lush and tall. This was not merely habit, it was necessity. China's population grew rapidly, pressing upon its farmland. To sustain so many mouths, every scrap of fertility mattered. Animal manure was valuable, but limited. Human waste, produced in steady abundance, became the missing piece. In time, systems of collection were formalized. Cities developed networks of waste collectors, men who moved through neighborhoods each night, emptying jars and pits, and carrying their loads to waiting carts. The carts creaked out to the countryside, where farmers paid for the contents. Waste became commodity, an invisible trade flowing from crowded streets to silent fields. The practice carried risks. Disease spread easily when waste and water mingled. Outbreaks of cholera and dysentery struck at times, reminding all that the cycle of nourishment carried dangers. Yet the benefits outweighed the risks. Without night soil, crops would have withered, harvests failed, and millions starved. For China, waste was not something to be hidden in sores or cast into rivers, but something to be harnessed, a gift in disguise. The cycle shaped daily life. In cities, chamber pots were emptied not into streets but into containers reserved for collection. Families knew that what they produced in private would, in time, return to them in the form of grain or vegetables. It created an intimacy between body and land, a recognition that survival depended not only on what one ate but also on what one returned. Philosophy, too, reflected this cycle. Chinese thought, shaped by Confucian order and Daoist balance, often saw harmony in nature's cycles. Life and death, growth and decay, giving and taking, all were parts of a larger whole. Night soil fit this worldview perfectly. What seemed foul in one moment was, in another, the source of life. To embrace this was to embrace balance, to see that even waste had its place. Travelers from the West were often startled, even horrified, by the practice. When Europeans arrived in China in later centuries, they recoiled at the sight and smell of night soil being carried through streets. To them, accustomed to flushing waste away or hiding it in cesspits, the idea of spreading it upon fields seemed unthinkable. Yet these same travelers also marveled at China's lush fields, its steady harvests, and its ability to feed immense populations. What seemed strange was, in fact, wisdom. The use of night soil was not limited to villages. Great cities like Beijing and Nanjing had entire systems devoted to its collection. Teams of men carried buckets through alleyways, their footsteps echoing in the night. They tipped waste into larger containers, which were hauled away on carts. Farmers waited outside city walls, ready to purchase what urban families no longer wanted. It was an economy hidden in plain sight, one that linked the bustle of markets with the quiet of fields. Even the language reveals the practice's importance. Terms for waste in Chinese often carried less stigma than in the West. To speak of night soil was to speak not of shame but of utility. Farmers valued it, families accepted it, and the cycle continued without interruption for centuries. Of course, not everyone enjoyed the system. Collectors bore the burden, their work unpleasant, their loads heavy, their bodies marked by smell. Yet they were necessary, and in their labor lay the nourishment of millions. Some were paid by the city, others by farmers directly. In either case, their task was essential, and though unglamorous, it was honored by necessity. The practice endured well into the modern age. In the 19th and even 20th centuries, night soil collection was still common in parts of China, Japan, and Korea. Photographs show men with shoulder poles balancing buckets, walking through crowded streets, bound for the countryside. Even as cities modernized, even as railways and factories rose, the ancient cycle continued. Stand in a rice paddy on a summer morning, the mist rising from water, the green shoots glowing in early light. Beneath the surface, the soil is dark, rich, alive with nutrients. Among them is the hidden gift of countless households, returned in humble buckets. The rice grows tall, bends heavy with grain, and feeds the very families who once filled those buckets. It is a cycle as complete as the turning of the seasons, as steady as the rising of the sun. To modern sensibilities, it may seem unpleasant. Yet there is a kind of quiet poetry in the practice. Nothing wasted, nothing lost. What leaves the body feeds the soil, what grows in the soil feeds the body, and the cycle turns again. It is a lesson in humility, in resourcefulness, in seeing the value of what is easily ignored. From here, our journey will leave the ordered fields of China and return to the crowded streets of Europe. We will step into the narrow alleys of medieval towns, where chamber pots were flung from windows and filth ran thick in the gutters. If China reveals the wisdom of embracing waste, medieval Europe reveals the danger of ignoring it. And in that contrast, the hidden history of sanitation grows clearer still. Part 8. Medieval Europe, Streets of Filth. When the last Roman aqueducts fell silent, when the baths grew cold and the latrines crumbled into ruins, Europe slowly forgot what it once knew about sanitation. 4 centuries after the empire's collapse, the marvels of sewers and drains became memories buried under stone and soil. Cities grew again, but they grew without the hidden foundations that had sustained Rome. By the Middle Ages, streets across Europe echoed with footsteps, markets, prayers, and laughter, but beneath it all, they reeked of filth. Life in a medieval town was close, crowded, and noisy. Houses leaned in over narrow lanes, their upper stories almost touching above. Children ran through alleys, chickens pecked at scraps, and merchants hawked goods in squares. Yet around every corner, in every gutter, there lingered the unmistakable smell of humanity's constant companion. Chamber pots were emptied into the streets, cesspits overflowed, and refuse mingled with mud and straw. To walk through a city like Paris, London, or Cologne was to wade through a mixture of life and decay. The chamber pot was the heart of daily sanitation. Every household, rich or poor, kept one, a simple vessel of wood, clay, or metal, tucked under a bed or beside a chair. It spared people the trouble of venturing outdoors in the night or during storms. But what went into the pot had to come out again, and so each morning or evening, the contents were carried to the nearest window or door. With a quick shout, sometimes, in France, the cry of Garde l'eau. Watch out for the water. The waste was tossed into the street below. Sometimes the cry came too late. Passers-by knew well to walk close to walls, umbrellas, or wide hats tilted against the danger above. Streets quickly grew foul. Rain carried waste into gutters, where it mixed with straw, horse dung, and rotting food. In summer heat, the stench rose, heavy and inescapable. Flies buzzed in clouds, dogs and pigs rooted through piles, and children played in corners best avoided. The smell of a medieval town was its own constant presence, woven into the very air. Cesspits, dug behind houses or beneath them, offered another solution. These pits, lined with stone or left bare, collected waste for weeks or months. But without proper drains, they filled quickly. When full, they overflowed into yards or seeped into nearby wells. Labourers known as gong farmers in England or farceurs in France were paid to empty them, a grim, dangerous, and poorly regarded task. By lantern light, they descended into pits, shoveling the foul contents into carts to be hauled away. Many worked at night, both for privacy and to spare citizens the smell of their labor. Public latrines existed in some places, especially in monasteries, castles, and larger towns. Monks often built privies over streams, so that water carried waste away. Castles sometimes featured guardrobes, small projecting chambers with holes dropping down the walls, where waste fell into moats or pits below. But these were exceptions, available to the wealthy or the devout. For ordinary townsfolk, the street remained the most convenient option. The consequences were severe. Disease thrived in such conditions. Dysentery, typhoid, and parasites spread through contaminated water and food. Wells, often dug shallow and close to cesspits, carried sickness into every home. Epidemics flared regularly, striking down rich and poor alike. People blamed miasmas, bad air, for illness, not yet understanding germs. The heavy stench of streets seemed proof enough that foul odors brought death. Fires of herbs and incense were burned to drive away the imagined poison of smells, but the true danger lurked in the water and soil. Yet medieval people did not live in constant despair. For them, filth was ordinary, part of life's rhythm. They adapted. Streets were strewn with straw to absorb wetness, swept occasionally by guilds or city servants, though never thoroughly. Shoes and clothes were made to endure mud. Perfumes, spices, and flowers masked odors in wealthier homes. And humor softened the discomfort. Bawdy songs and jokes about chamber pots filled taverns and plays. Filth became so ordinary that it was often mocked rather than feared. Still, reform stirred at times. City councils issued ordinances against throwing waste into streets, though enforcement was weak. Some towns required residents to build cesspits or pay fines. Others hired workers to clean markets and squares. Rivers were sometimes declared off-limits for dumping, though too often ignored. Efforts rose and fell with outbreaks of disease, yet no lasting system took hold. The sounds of a medieval street carried this story too. The creak of carts, the clatter of hooves, the cries of vendors, and, amid them, the splash of a pot emptied from above. At night, footsteps echoed in alleys, sometimes followed by the soft thud of waste poured onto stones. Dogs barked, pigs grunted, and all around, the city murmured with its hidden flows. Despite the filth, life thrived. Markets bustled, cathedrals soared, universities grew. People loved, worked, and dreamed amid the odors. Children grew to adulthood, families endured, and cities expanded. Humanity's resilience meant that even in the foulest corners, hope remained. But the hidden cost was high. Epidemics would one day sweep through these same streets, striking with terrifying force. And when they did, the connection between filth and death would grow impossible to ignore. For now, though, imagine walking through London in the 13th century. The Thames glitters in sunlight, its banks crowded with boats and merchants. In narrow lanes behind, women call from windows, pouring chamber pots into the gutters below. The air smells of fish, smoke, dung, and something sour. Children chase geese, monks pass in silence, beggars stretch out hands for alms. Above all rises the great tower of the cathedral, its bells tolling. This was a world where splendor and filth lived side by side, inseparable companions. Medieval Europe reminds us that progress is never guaranteed. Rome had once flushed its sores with flowing water. The Indus had once drained its streets with precision. Yet here, in the heart of Christendom, people lived ankle-deep in waste. Knowledge had been lost, and with it, health and comfort. The lesson would be learned again, painfully, in the centuries to come. From here, our journey will lead into the darkest chapter of all, the arrival of plague. When the Black Death swept through Europe, filth provided a fertile ground for fear and death. And in that terror, people began to see that sanitation was not merely a matter of smell, but of survival itself. Part 9. The Black Death, Sanitation and Disease. In the middle of the 14th century, Europe faced a catastrophe so immense that it reshaped the very fabric of society. The Black Death, as it came to be known, swept across the continent with terrifying speed, leaving millions dead in its wake. It was a time of fear, of mourning, of bewilderment. Whole towns fell silent, families vanished overnight, and even the strongest faiths trembled under the weight of unanswered questions. And though its cause lay in fleas and rats carrying the plague bacterium, the stage had been prepared long before, in the filth of medieval cities, in the waste that lingered in streets and seeped into water. Sanitation, or rather the lack of it, became the invisible hand that guided death's scythe. Picture the streets of a 14th century town on the eve of the plague's arrival. Waste still poured from windows, cesspits overflowed, and animals roamed freely through alleys strewn with refuse. Wells lay perilously close to latrines, their waters tainted. The smell of rot, dung, and damp hung heavy in the air. These were perfect conditions for vermin, rats nesting in straw, scurrying across beams, darting through markets in search of scraps. Fleas thrived upon them, carrying within their small bodies the seeds of devastation. When the plague arrived, likely through ships docking in Mediterranean ports, it spread with shocking speed. Within months, it leapt from town to town, carried by trade routes, travelers, and vermin alike. In villages, whole families sickened and died. In cities, bodies piled in streets, and graveyards overflowed. Chroniclers wrote of carts rumbling through lanes, loaded with the dead, bells tolling endlessly, prayers whispered in fear. Death was everywhere, and the living could not keep pace with the dying. Though the true cause was unseen, people sought explanations. Many blamed the air itself, poisoned by foul smells, the dreaded miasma. Physicians urged people to carry herbs or press flowers to their faces, believing sweet scents could ward off contagion. Fires were lit in public squares to cleanse the air, smoke billowing against invisible danger. Others turned to astrology, blaming the alignment of planets, or to divine wrath, believing the plague a punishment for sin. Still others sought scapegoats, accusing minority groups, with tragic and violent results. Yet beneath all these fears, filth lingered as the unacknowledged accomplice. Cities already weakened by poor sanitation now became breeding grounds for despair. Waste piled in corners, even as death claimed those who might have carried it away. Cesspits lay untended, their contents seeping into soil and water. Dogs, cats, and pigs roamed freely, some killed in panic, others left to scavenge the remains of households struck down. The boundaries between waste, vermin, and humanity blurred, and in that blur the plague thrived. Daily life collapsed under the weight of sickness. Markets emptied, workshops fell silent, fields lay untended. The rhythm of chamber pots emptied into streets slowed, then stopped, as households perished. Gong farmers no longer came to clean pits, and public spaces grew fouler still. In towns where fear drove people indoors, waste accumulated unchecked, adding stench to sorrow. To walk through a city was to smell both filth and death, inseparable in their assault upon the senses. And yet, amid the horror, lessons slowly emerged. People began to notice that filth seemed tied to sickness, even if they misunderstood the link. Some towns issued new rules, ordering waste to be removed more frequently, or prohibiting dumping near wells and rivers. Quarantine, too, became a response. Ships suspected of carrying plague were held offshore, their passengers isolated. Though imperfect, these measures hinted at a dawning realization that survival required not only prayer and ritual, but practical steps to control the unseen dangers that filth concealed. The plague's impact was not only immediate but lasting. With so many dead, labor became scarce. Survivors demanded higher wages, and feudal systems cracked under the strain. Towns rebuilt, but slowly, with greater attention to cleanliness. Guilds of cleaners and scavengers grew more important. City councils invested in rules and infrastructure, however crude, to manage waste more carefully. The trauma of plague etched into memory the connection between disorder and death. Imagine standing in a small village churchyard in the years after the plague. The ground is uneven, filled with hastily dug graves. Families gather in silence, their numbers fewer than before. Children play cautiously, their laughter subdued. And in the village itself, new efforts stir, cesspits dug deeper, waste carried farther away, laws posted against dumping in streets. Out of sorrow, a fragile seed of reform takes root. Still, the path forward was uneven. Centuries would pass before sanitation truly advanced. Filth continued to haunt European towns, outbreaks of disease returning again and again. Yet the Black Death left a scar deep enough that sanitation could no longer be ignored entirely. It was no longer just a nuisance of smell or dignity. It had become a matter of survival, bound forever in memory with the shadow of plague. The sounds of that world still echo in our imagination. The tolling of bells, the rumble of carts carrying the dead, the whispered prayers of families, the cries of scavengers in empty streets. Beneath it all, the quiet drip of waste into overflowing pits, the scurry of rats through refuse, the unseen bite of fleas. It was a symphony of filth and fear, and it reshaped Europe's understanding of life, death, and the fragile line between them. As our journey continues, we will step beyond the medieval world and into the early modern age, when cities grew larger and more crowded, when trade brought both wealth and new dangers, and when waste piled higher than ever before. In those centuries, filth itself would become a crisis, rising to such a stench that even kings and parliaments could no longer look away. But for now, as we close this chapter, we carry with us the memory of plague, a reminder that neglect of sanitation is never without consequence, and that in the silence of forgotten drains, death may wait unseen. Part 10. Early Modern Cities, the Great Stink. By the dawn of the early modern era, Europe's cities were larger, noisier, and more crowded than ever before. Trade swelled harbors with ships, merchants filled markets, and palaces gleamed with wealth. Cathedrals towered, universities flourished, and towns spread outward beyond their medieval walls. But beneath the growing bustle lay the same old problem, now magnified by sheer numbers. As populations soared, waste piled higher, cesspits filled faster, and the rivers that once carried life became rivers of foulness. What had been a nuisance in medieval towns grew into a crisis for booming capitals. And nowhere was this crisis felt more vividly than in London during the 19th century, in what history remembers as the Great Stink. The roots of the crisis stretched back centuries. In the 17th and 18th centuries, London's population ballooned. What had been a medieval town became a metropolis of nearly 2 million by the 1800s. Each of those millions produced waste every day, and most of it ended up in cesspits, ditches, or directly in the River Thames. Streets echoed with the splash of chamber pots emptied into gutters, and carts carried night soil through alleys to the countryside. Yet the system could not keep up. Cesspits overflowed, wells grew polluted, and rivers turned black with refuse. The Thames, once a source of pride and beauty, became London's open sore. By summer, its waters frothed with waste, a slow-moving broth of filth. The smell rose in heavy waves, drifting through markets, clinging to bridges, and creeping into Parliament itself. In hot weather, it was unbearable. Visitors gagged, citizens complained, but for decades the problem lingered unsolved. Disease thrived in this environment. Cholera struck in waves throughout the 19th century, killing tens of thousands. At first, people blamed miasma, the bad air rising from foul-smelling streets and rivers. Doctors urged citizens to flee the stench, believing clean air the cure. But slowly, through the work of men like John Snow, the truth emerged. Cholera spread through contaminated water, not air. His famous map of a Soho outbreak traced the illness to a single pump, its water tainted by sewage. Though revolutionary, his discovery was slow to be accepted. Many clung to the belief that smell itself carried death. Meanwhile, the stench worsened. In the summer of 1858, an unusually hot season baked the Thames into a cauldron of rot. The smell grew so overpowering that Parliament, which sat directly on the river's banks, found its sessions nearly impossible. Curtains soaked in chloride of lime were hung over windows to block the odor, but to little effect. Politicians gagged at their benches, clerks fled to cooler air, and debates faltered. The crisis was undeniable. Newspapers called it the Great Stink, and all of London reeled under its assault. It was the turning point. At last, action could no longer be delayed. Joseph Bazalgette, an engineer of vision and determination, was tasked with creating a modern sewer system for London. His plan was vast: hundreds of miles of brick-lined tunnels, intercepting drains to capture waste before it reached the Thames, and pumping stations to lift sewage where gravity could not. It was one of the greatest engineering feats of the century. Construction took years, armies of workers toiling in mud, brick, and foul air. Immense sewers were dug beneath the city, arches of brick rising like subterranean cathedrals. Pumping stations, decorated with Victorian pride, stood like temples of sanitation, their engines roaring as they lifted waste toward the sea. Slowly, the Thames grew cleaner, and the stench began to fade. Bazalgette's vision transformed London, saving lives and restoring dignity. Other cities followed. Paris, long infamous for its overflowing streets, built grand sewers that still astonish visitors today. Haussmann's renovation of the city included not only broad boulevards but also underground channels to carry waste away. Tourists could even descend into them, marveling at the scale. Across Europe and beyond, cities realized that modern life required hidden rivers of sanitation. The change was not only practical but cultural. Sanitation became tied to progress, to health, to civic pride. No longer was filth accepted as inevitable. Instead, it was seen as something conquerable, an enemy to be defeated by brick, water, and science. Pamphlets praised cleanliness, reformers demanded better drainage, and public health became a new field of study. The unseen world of waste, once ignored, became central to the story of modern cities. Imagine London before and after. Before, a hot summer evening by the Thames meant choking on stench, the water dark and sluggish, boats cutting through sludge. After, the same evening meant strolling along embankments built over Bazalgette's soars, the river flowing cleaner, the air fresher. Beneath one's feet, hidden tunnels carried away the city's filth, unseen but vital. What was once a curse had become an invisible blessing. Yet the struggle was not without irony. While London's rich lounged in drawing rooms above clean soars, much of the world still lived amid filth. Colonies, villages, and poorer districts of cities lacked the resources for such systems. The divide between those who enjoyed modern sanitation and those who did not widened. The Great Stink may have forced reform in London, but billions around the world would continue to face the same problems for generations. Still, the lesson was clear. Sanitation was not luxury, but necessity. It was as vital to life as clean food or safe shelter. The Great Stink, foul and unforgettable, marked the moment when a city and a civilization admitted that the hidden flows of waste could no longer be ignored. Close your eyes and picture the Thames on that hot day in 1858. The sun beats down, the water thick with filth, the air trembling with stench. Politicians cover their noses, clerks flee, and the city groans under the weight of its own waste. Now picture the roar of engines in Bazalgette's pumping stations, the steady flow of water in brick-lined tunnels, the quiet satisfaction of knowing that filth has been conquered, at least for a time. It is a transformation both humble and heroic, a reminder that sometimes civilization's greatest triumphs are not in battles or monuments, but in the quiet work of keeping cities livable. From here, our journey will carry us toward the invention of the modern toilet, the humble porcelain throne that would change not only comfort but also dignity, shaping how households across the world dealt with what they could no longer see. But even as we celebrate that invention, we will remember the stinking banks of the Thames, and the day when London learned that progress begins with the unseen rivers beneath our feet. Part 11. The Toilet Revolution, Invention and Spread. For thousands of years, humanity managed waste with pits, pots, jars, and flowing rivers. Civilizations rose and fell, cities thrived and withered, all while people crouched in fields, perched over ditches, or carried night soil to waiting carts. Even Rome, with its aqueducts and sewers, offered no true privacy, no invention that we might call a toilet in the modern sense. It was not until the last few centuries that the idea of a private, flushing fixture, a device that removed waste silently and instantly, became part of daily life. The story of the toilet revolution is one of invention, resistance, embarrassment, and eventual triumph. The tale begins in Elizabethan England, in the court of Queen Elizabeth I. There, a courtier named Sir John Harington designed a curious device, a chair fitted with a cistern of water that, when released, would flush waste through a pipe. In 1596, he installed one for the Queen at her palace. It was a marvel, elegant and ingenious, far ahead of its time. And yet, it remained a novelty. Few others adopted the idea. The plumbing needed was complex, the cost high, and the culture not yet ready. Harrington's flush toilet passed into history as an oddity, remembered more in jokes about his name than in widespread use. 4 centuries afterward, chamber pots and cesspits remained the norm. People relieved themselves in simple vessels, which were then emptied into streets or pits. Even in grand houses, night soil was carried away by servants, while city streets reeked of human presence. The flush toilet waited in obscurity, its promise unrealized. It was not until the 18th and 19th centuries that inventors returned to the idea. In 1775, Alexander Cumming patented a design with an S-shaped trap that used water to seal off odors from below. This innovation, the S-bend, became the foundation of modern toilets. For the first time, waste could be flushed away while smells were blocked from rising back into the room. Other inventors refined the idea, improving valves, cisterns, and bowls. Slowly, the flushing toilet began to take shape. Yet invention alone was not enough. For toilets to spread, cities needed sewer, clean water supplies, and cultural acceptance. In many places, even as late as the 19th century, the idea of a toilet inside one's house seemed strange, even dangerous. Why bring filth closer to where one ate and slept? People preferred the familiar chamber pot or the outdoor privy. Toilets were viewed as luxuries, indulgences of the wealthy, or even suspicious contraptions that wasted good water. Resistance was not only cultural but practical. Early toilets often emptied into cesspits that quickly overflowed, or into drains not designed for such flows. Without proper sewers, they created more problems than they solved. In some towns, authorities even banned them, fearing that sudden surges of water and waste would damage fragile drains. In this way, the spread of toilets was uneven, sometimes celebrated, sometimes resisted. But slowly, progress gathered pace. The cholera outbreaks of the 19th century, combined with the horrors of the Great Stink, forced cities to build modern sewers. Once such infrastructure existed, toilets could finally flourish. Wealthy households installed them first, enjoying the comfort of flushing away waste with a pull of a chain. In time, hotels, railway stations, and public buildings followed. The convenience was undeniable. Privacy, cleanliness, and dignity were transformed. The toilet also reshaped daily life. No longer did families need to carry chamber pots through streets or yards. No longer did servants bear the burden of emptying waste. The act itself, once loud and public in Roman latrines or messy and dangerous in medieval streets, became silent and private. The bathroom emerged as a new kind of room, dedicated to cleanliness, fitted with porcelain fixtures that gleamed like altars to hygiene. Design, too, became art. Manufacturers produced toilets with ornate patterns, polished handles, and shining cisterns. Catalogues displayed them proudly, as symbols of progress. To own a flushing toilet was to step into modernity, to join the march of civilization. Advertisements promised not only convenience but also health, selling the toilet as a shield against disease. What had once been unspoken became marketable, even aspirational. The spread of toilets also brought new words into daily speech. The term water closet, shortened to WC, became common in Britain. In America, bathroom and restroom softened the subject with gentler euphemisms. Other names, lavatory, loo, John, reflected cultural quirks and humor. Even in language, the toilet reshaped how people spoke of the most universal of acts. Public toilets, too, became part of the landscape. Cities built them along streets, in parks, and at train stations. Though often segregated by gender and class, they offered relief to growing urban populations. Some were elegant, with brass fittings and marble floors. Others were plain but practical. They symbolized the recognition that waste was not only a private matter but a public necessity. The toilet revolution also intersected with questions of dignity and equality. For women, access to clean and private facilities opened new possibilities in public life. For workers, toilets in factories or offices offered relief during long shifts. For travelers, the presence of public restrooms marked a new level of comfort and freedom. Sanitation, once hidden and ignored, became a measure of social progress. Of course, challenges remained. Not all households could afford the new devices. In poorer districts, chamber pots and privies lingered well into the 20th century. In rural areas, outhouses remained common, their wooden walls standing quietly at the edge of fields. Yet the direction of change was clear. The toilet was no longer a curiosity but a necessity, slowly making its way into every home. Imagine the experience of a family in the late 19th century, stepping for the first time into a bathroom with a flushing toilet. The porcelain gleams, the handle shines. With a pull, water rushes, carrying waste away instantly. The sound is startling, the cleanliness reassuring. No smell rises, no chamber pot waits to be emptied. It is a moment of transformation, as ordinary as it is profound. From Sir John Harington's lonely experiment to the porcelain thrones of the modern age, the toilet revolution reshaped daily life. It gave privacy where none had existed, dignity where it had been lacking, and safety where disease once thrived. It was not glamorous, rarely celebrated in history books, yet its impact rivals that of any invention. And so, as we close this chapter, let us reflect on the quiet power of the toilet. It is more than a fixture of porcelain and pipes. It is a symbol of progress, a promise of health, a reminder that civilization is built not only on monuments and machines but also on the hidden comforts that allow us to live with dignity. From here, our journey will continue into the 20th century, when saws spread across the globe, when sanitation became a field of science, and when the divide between those with and without clean toilets grew sharper still. The toilet may have triumphed in wealthy cities, but billions remained outside its reach, a reminder that progress, like water, does not always flow evenly. Part 12. Saws of the Modern Age. By the 20th century, the world had entered a new relationship with waste. For thousands of years, people had relied on pits, jars, rivers, and fields. In Rome, drains had carried sewage away, but their lessons were forgotten. In China, waste had been turned into fertilizer, sustaining entire populations. In medieval Europe, filth had ruled the streets, only to be tamed centuries later by the engineers of London and Paris. Now, in the modern age, humanity sought something more ambitious still. Networks of pipes stretching beneath whole cities, saws vast enough to carry away the waste of millions, hidden systems as vital as the air we breathe, yet unseen by most. Saws became the quiet skeletons of modern life. Beneath pavements and boulevards, they spread like roots, branching, twisting, gathering. To walk through a city in the early 20th century was to walk above miles of tunnels, brick-lined, concrete poured, and iron reinforced. Water rushed within them, sometimes clear, often foul, always flowing. They connected every home with the wider body of the city, each flush of a toilet joining a hidden river that surged toward treatment plants at the edge of town. Paris offered one of the most famous examples. Haussmann's sweeping redesign of the city in the mid-19th century had left not only boulevards wide and elegant, but also saws vast and ordered. Visitors marveled at them. Writers described them as subterranean palaces, arches rising above rushing water, lantern light glinting off damp walls. Victor Hugo, in Les Miserables, used Paris's saws as both setting and symbol, a labyrinth of darkness carrying away the filth of society. For Parisians, the saws became a point of pride, evidence that their city had embraced the future. London, too, celebrated its hidden infrastructure. Joseph Bazalgette's mighty system, begun during the Great Stink, had grown into a network that kept pace with the city's swelling population. Massive pumping stations, their engines roaring like industrial choirs, lifted waste where gravity faltered. Embankments along the Thames stood as monuments to engineering as well as sanitation, blending beauty with necessity. Beneath them, brick tunnels carried away what Londoners preferred not to imagine. Other cities followed suit. New York carved vast saws beneath Manhattan. Chicago re-engineered rivers to flow backward. Hamburg, Vienna, and Berlin poured concrete channels that stretched for miles. Across the industrial world, engineers battled waste with brick, pipe, and pumping engines. Sanitation became a science, its experts designing systems with charts, formulas, and maps. Where once filth had been the shame of cities, now its removal became their boast. Treatment plants rose at the edges of towns, transforming sewage into cleaner water before returning it to rivers and seas. The idea of not merely carrying waste away but purifying it marked another step forward. Engineers built settling tanks, filtration beds, and later chemical treatments. What left the toilet no longer vanished unconsidered. It entered a cycle of processing, cleansing, and return. Civilization had grown bold enough to take responsibility not only for its own comfort but for the rivers that sustained it. Daily life changed in quiet but profound ways. In the 19th century, a walk through city streets meant dodging refuse, enduring stenches, and living with constant risk of disease. By the mid-20th century, those same streets grew cleaner, safer, fresher. Flies diminished, odors faded, and outbreaks of cholera dwindled. Life expectancy rose. The unseen sores beneath feet saved more lives than all the surgeons above ground. And yet, this triumph remained invisible. Tourists admired cathedrals and museums, not pumping stations or treatment plants. Newspapers celebrated parades and wars, not saw expansions. The men and women who labored beneath streets, bricklayers shaping arches, engineers testing water, cleaners wading through darkness, rarely received thanks. Civilization owed them everything, yet spoke of them little. There was also a cultural shift. Cleanliness became not only a comfort but a virtue. To live in a house connected to sources and supplied with running water was to be modern, respectable, safe. Advertisements promised health through plumbing. Bathrooms gleamed with porcelain, soap, and tile, shrines to hygiene. The shame once attached to filth turned into pride in cleanliness. And beneath it all, saws carried the unseen burden, allowing homes to glow with dignity. But progress was uneven. In wealthy districts, pipes gleamed, water flowed, and toilets flushed with ease. In poorer quarters, connections lagged, cesspits lingered, and diseases still struck. Globally, the divide was sharper still. While New York and Paris celebrated their subterranean cathedrals, villages in Africa, Asia, and South America relied on pits and fields. Billions still lacked access to clean water, let alone sources. The triumph of sanitation was real, but it was not universal. The modern age also brought new anxieties. What was carried away did not vanish. It entered rivers, lakes, and seas. Pollution grew, fish died, and cities realized that waste ignored was waste returned. Treatment plants grew larger, more complex, using science to purify water before it re-entered the cycle. Microbes were studied, chemicals tested, filters refined. Sanitation had become a battle not only against smell and disease, but against environmental damage. Imagine walking along a modern city street at night. The lamps glow, cars hum past, people hurry home. Beneath them flows a river of unseen waste, carried through pipes, rushing toward distant treatment plants. The pedestrians above rarely think of it, yet their health, their comfort, their very survival depends upon it. Without that hidden river, the city would collapse within days. The sound of the modern saw is different from Rome's rushing aqueducts or London's stinking Thames. It is the hum of pumps, the echo of water against concrete, the steady hiss of treatment plants working through the night. It is not glorious, but it is reassuring, the sound of civilization tending to its own survival. The story of sores in the modern age is, at heart, the story of humility. Humanity admitted that it could not thrive amid its own filth, and so it built systems vast and unseen to carry it away. It learned that health and dignity require not only medicine and law, but also pipes and drains. And it discovered that progress is not only in skyscrapers and machines, but in the quiet flows beneath our feet. From here, our journey will turn to those who still live outside this hidden network. For even in the 21st century, billions lack access to safe toilets or sores. In those places, the lessons of Rome, London, and Paris remain unrealized. The divide between those who flush and those who cannot is one of the starkest inequalities of our time. Part 13. The Global Sanitation Divide. The 20th century brought pipes, pumps, and treatment plants to many of the world's great cities. Beneath pavements and boulevards, hidden rivers carried waste away, transforming life expectancy and reshaping daily comfort. Yet as some parts of the globe celebrated gleaming porcelain bathrooms and silent flushes, vast regions remained outside this revolution. The story of sanitation, once thought to be one of triumph, revealed instead a deep divide between those who lived with sores beneath their feet and those who still relied on pits, fields, or open water. This divide was not only about technology, but about dignity, health, and survival. In the wealthiest nations, bathrooms became shrines to modernity. Tiled walls, polished sinks, and flushing toilets offered privacy and cleanliness unimaginable to medieval kings. Water flowed freely, hot and cold, summoned by the turn of a tap. Children grew up never questioning the small miracle of waste vanishing with a pull of a handle. The very idea of life without such comforts seemed distant, even unthinkable. Sanitation became invisible, its presence so certain that it faded into the background of modern existence. But beyond these comfortable households, billions faced a different reality. In rural villages, crowded slums, and informal settlements, sanitation lagged. Open defecation remained common in parts of South Asia and Africa, where fields and riverbanks served as toilets. In crowded urban districts, makeshift pits overflowed, their contents seeping into soil and water. Children played barefoot near streams dark with sewage. Women sought privacy at night, walking far from homes, risking safety for modesty. In these places, the absence of sanitation was not only a nuisance but a daily threat. The consequences were brutal. Diseases like cholera, dysentery, and typhoid still flourished where waste mingled with water. Children suffered most. Diarrheal illnesses, so easily prevented with clean water and proper toilets, claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands each year. In communities without sores, each rainfall risked flooding homes with contaminated water. Wells, shallow and unprotected, drew sickness as surely as they drew thirst. What modern cities had banished with pipes and pumps continued to stalk the poor with relentless persistence. International organizations raised alarms. The World Health Organization declared sanitation a basic human right. Campaigns such as Sanitation for All sought to build toilets, spread education, and bring dignity to communities long neglected. Engineers designed low-cost latrines, composting toilets, and community systems that could work without massive infrastructure. Yet progress was uneven. Where governments invested, change came quickly. Where poverty, corruption, or conflict reigned, the problem lingered. The divide was not only between nations but within them. In megacities, wealthy districts enjoyed modern bathrooms, while only a few streets away, families lived beside open drains. The gleam of porcelain and the stench of sewage coexisted, separated not by oceans but by walls. Sanitation became a measure of inequality as stark as wealth or education. To flush a toilet was to belong to a different world than those who crouched by rivers at dawn. Cultural attitudes also shaped the divide. In some places, the act of building toilets was hindered by taboos, traditions, or embarrassment. Governments distributed latrines, only to find them unused, families continuing with familiar habits in fields. Education proved as vital as engineering. Change required not only bricks and pipes but conversations, respect for culture, and patient adaptation. Yet amid the challenges, there were successes. In parts of India, mass campaigns encouraged communities to end open defecation, linking cleanliness with pride and health. In Africa, programs trained local masons to build affordable latrines, creating both sanitation and livelihoods. Aid groups brought composting toilets to regions where water was scarce, turning waste into fertilizer rather than pollution. These stories showed that solutions need not always mimic Western sources. They could be adapted, affordable, and sustainable. Still, the divide endures. Over 3 billion people worldwide lack access to safe sanitation. For them, each day carries risks that wealthier nations barely remember. The gap is not only in comfort but in survival. A flushed toilet in Paris or New York means more than convenience. It represents centuries of progress, investments of billions, and privileges denied to many. Imagine standing at the edge of two neighborhoods. In one, houses gleam with bathrooms, children wash hands beneath clean taps, and toilets flush silently. In the other, families share a single pit. Water comes from a polluted stream, and waste runs in shallow ditches between homes. The distance between them may be only a few hundred steps, yet the gulf in health, dignity, and opportunity is immeasurable. The sounds of this divide are telling too. In modern homes, the quiet rush of water masks the reality of waste. In poorer settlements, the buzz of flies, the trickle of open drains, and the coughs of sick children reveal the unspoken burden. Smells, too, define the difference. The freshness of soap and tile on one side, the sourness of open pits on the other. These sensory contrasts are the daily reality of billions, a reminder that progress is not evenly shared. The global sanitation divide forces us to confront a question. What does it mean to be modern? Is it skyscrapers and smartphones? Or is it the ability to relieve oneself in safety and dignity? For those without toilets, the answer is clear. Until the most basic needs are met, other measures of progress ring hollow. Civilization is not judged by monuments alone, but by the hidden flows that protect its people from disease. As we drift toward the conclusion of this journey, we carry with us the weight of both triumph and failure. Saws and toilets have saved more lives than almost any other invention. Yet their absence still condemns millions to suffering. The history of sanitation is not finished. It is an unfinished work, waiting for commitment, compassion, and ingenuity. From here, our story will turn not backward but forward. For the future of waste is being written in laboratories, in space stations, and in homes that seek sustainability. Toilets orbit above the Earth. Composting systems transform waste into energy, and engineers imagine cities where nothing is wasted. The cycle that began with pits and fields now bends toward a future where even waste may be a resource, where humanity closes the circle fully at last. Part 14. Waste in the Future, Space and Beyond. From the pits of ancient villages to the marble latrines of Rome, from the buckets of medieval alleys to the porcelain thrones of modern bathrooms, humanity has always faced the same question. What do we do with what we leave behind? The answers have shifted with time and place, shaped by rivers, deserts, empires, and revolutions. Yet as the 20th century gave way to the 21st, the question began to change again. For now, we look not only at soars beneath cities, but at toilets orbiting the Earth, composting systems in eco-homes, and technologies that see waste not as nuisance but as resource. The story of sanitation has always been about survival, and in the future, survival may depend on seeing waste as something more than something to flush away. Nowhere is this clearer than in space. For astronauts, sanitation is not merely a matter of comfort but of engineering precision. On Earth, we flush and forget, trusting miles of pipes and rivers of water to do the unseen work. In orbit, no such luxury exists. Every drop of water must be conserved, every molecule managed. Early space missions faced awkward solutions: plastic bags, bottles, and suction devices designed less for dignity than for necessity. Astronauts spoke candidly, sometimes with humor, about the challenges of going to the bathroom in zero gravity. Yet engineers listened, refined, and built systems capable of handling waste in a weightless world. Modern space toilets are marvels of design. They use air currents, suction, and careful seals to ensure that waste does not float where it should not. Solid waste is compressed, stored, sometimes dried for disposal or eventual return to Earth. Liquid waste, more precious, is filtered, treated, and transformed back into drinking water. Astronauts often joke that yesterday's coffee becomes tomorrow's tea, but beneath the humor lies a profound truth. In space, waste and water are one continuous cycle. Nothing can be wasted, not even waste itself. This cycle reflects a lesson Earth itself is beginning to learn. Our planet, though vast, is not limitless. Soars can carry waste away, but where is away when rivers and seas grow polluted? Treatment plants can clean water, but they consume energy and leave residues behind. Landfills fill, oceans choke with plastics, and the dream of flushing and forgetting grows fragile. In this light, the future of sanitation is not merely disposal, but transformation. Composting toilets offer one vision. These devices, long used in rural or off-grid homes, transform human waste into soil through natural processes. With careful design, odor is controlled, pathogens destroyed, and the result a rich compost that can fertilize fields. In eco-villages and sustainable homes, composting toilets reduce water use and close the loop between body and soil. What once seemed primitive becomes, in a new age of scarcity, profoundly modern. Biogas systems offer another possibility. In parts of Asia and Africa, households and communities are experimenting with digesters that convert waste into methane gas. The gas fuels stoves, lights homes, or powers small generators, while the remaining slurry fertilizes fields. Here, waste becomes energy, a hidden resource waiting to be tapped. The very material once seen as burden now warms meals and powers lamps. Technology pushes further still. Researchers experiment with systems that extract phosphorus and nitrogen from waste, essential nutrients for agriculture. Others develop toilets that incinerate waste with solar heat, reducing it to ash. Some imagine networks where waste is separated at the source, recycled into materials or energy streams as diverse as plastics, fertilizers, or even construction bricks. The toilet of the future may not flush at all, but sort, filter, and transform, turning every visit into a small act of resource management. Cultural attitudes, too, are beginning to shift. Where once waste was unspoken, hidden behind euphemism, more communities now speak openly of its management. Schools teach children about water cycles, recycling, and sustainability. Documentaries reveal the hidden worlds of treatment plants and sanitation workers. The subject once taboo becomes part of environmental awareness, a recognition that survival requires honesty about what we leave behind. Yet inequality persists. While laboratories design toilets for Mars, millions on Earth still lack safe latrines. The contrast is sharp. Astronauts recycling urine into drinking water above the planet, while children in villages below drink from streams polluted with sewage. The future of sanitation cannot be only about technology for the privileged few. It must also be about justice, ensuring that the simplest dignity reaches all. Still, the possibilities inspire wonder. Imagine a colony on Mars, its habitats domed against the red dust. Inside, families live in rooms supplied with recycled air and water. Their toilets do not flush into sewer but into processes that separate, purify, and reuse. The waste of one day becomes the water and fertilizer of the next. Life continues in a closed loop, sustained by a recognition as old as China's night soil and as new as spaceflight. Nothing is waste if it feeds life again. Even on Earth, the design of bathrooms may change. No longer shrines to endless water use, they may become centers of recycling, where every stream is captured and reused. Toilets may connect not to vast sewers but to neighborhood systems that generate energy or fertilizer. Bathrooms may glow with digital displays, reminding users of the water saved or the energy produced by their visit. What was once hidden may become celebrated, a source of pride in sustainable living. Picture, if you will, the sound of the future toilet. Not the rushing flush of gallons of water, but the quiet hum of filters, the faint whir of fans, the click of valves. A system not of disappearance but of transformation. The smell is neutral, the result useful, the cycle unbroken. It is not only convenience but connection, a recognition that we are part of a larger whole, bound to the soil, the water, and the sky. The journey of waste has always mirrored the journey of civilization. In the wilderness, early humans left it behind without thought. In villages, it piled up until necessity demanded pits. In Rome, it flowed in sewers, then vanished in medieval streets, only to return in the hidden tunnels of the modern age. Now, in the future, it circles back, reminding us that what we leave must always return. In space, in eco-homes, in cities seeking sustainability, the cycle tightens, teaching us humility and ingenuity. From here, our story will move toward its final chapter. We will look back across the ages, from pits to porcelain, from filth to flush, from rivers fouled to water reclaimed. And we will ask what this long history means, not only for survival, but for what it reveals about us as human beings. For in the end, the history of waste is not just about engineering or disease. It is about dignity, community, and the hidden foundations of civilization itself. Part 15. Conclusion: Civilization's Hidden Foundation. History is often told as a tale of kings and conquerors, of battles fought and monuments raised. We hear of empires rising on the strength of armies, of cities glowing with wealth, of philosophies that shaped the minds of nations. Yet beneath every throne room and marketplace, beneath every temple and library, another story flows quietly, unseen but essential. It is the story of what humanity leaves behind, and how we have learned, slowly, painfully, and creatively, to manage it. From the first wanderers on open plains to the astronauts circling above the Earth, every human life has shared the same daily rhythm. Our bodies give, and they must also release. In that simple truth lies a thread that binds us across time and place. The pits dug by early villagers, the drains of the Indus Valley, the jars of Mesopotamia, the sewers of Rome, the cesspits of medieval towns, the porcelain toilets of the modern age, all are chapters in one continuous story. A story not of glory, but of necessity. It is tempting to laugh at this history, to find humor in its earthiness, to smile at Romans sitting side by side on stone benches or Victorians fainting from the stench of the Thames. And indeed, there is humor, for humanity has always softened discomfort with laughter. But there is also solemnity. For behind the jokes lies a truth. Sanitation has saved more lives than all the battles and medicines combined. To carry waste away, to keep water clean, to provide privacy and dignity, these are achievements as great as pyramids or cathedrals. Consider the consequences when sanitation failed. The Black Death swept through streets piled with refuse, killing millions. Cholera haunted cities where sewage mingled with drinking water. Countless children in countless villages fell ill because pits overflowed or rivers ran foul. Disease followed filth as surely as night follows day. To forget sanitation was to invite disaster. And so, again and again, societies relearn the lesson. Survival depends not only on courage and strength, but on the quiet work of keeping clean. And consider the triumphs when sanitation succeeded. The Indus Valley's straight drains, Rome's Cloaca Maxima, Bazalgette's soars beneath London, Paris's subterranean boulevards, each transformed daily life. They allowed populations to swell, cities to endure, civilizations to flourish. They gave people not only health but comfort, dignity, and the freedom to dream beyond survival. A clean street is as much a foundation for philosophy and art as any library. Without it, minds are consumed by sickness and despair. With it, they are freed to imagine, to create, to build. Today, for many, the flush of a toilet is so ordinary that it passes unnoticed. We rise, we press a handle, and what we leave vanishes. We do not hear the rush of water through pipes, the echo of tunnels beneath streets, the hum of treatment plants at city's edge. We do not see the engineers, the cleaners, the workers who tend these hidden rivers. And yet, without them, modern life would collapse within days. The unseen is the essential. The ordinary is the miraculous. But the story is not finished. 4 billion still live without safe toilets or clean water. For them, the lessons of history are not distant but daily. They crouch in fields, they fetch water from streams, they risk disease with every sip. The divide between those who flush and those who cannot remains one of the sharpest inequalities of our age. To close that divide is not only a matter of technology, but of justice and compassion. Civilization is measured not by its tallest towers, but by whether its most vulnerable can live with dignity. The future, too, will test us. In space, astronauts recycle waste into water. On Earth, eco-homes turn waste into fertilizer or fuel. Engineers dream of systems where nothing is lost, where even what we discard feeds life again. Perhaps the toilet of tomorrow will not hide waste, but celebrate its transformation, reminding us that cycles, not lines, sustain life. The story that began with pits may end with loops, complete and unbroken. So as we close this long journey, let us reflect on what it means. Sanitation is not merely about pipes and toilets. It is about respect, for ourselves, for our neighbors, for the earth. It is about recognizing that what is humble is also vital, that what is hidden supports what is visible. It is about dignity as much as health, survival as much as progress. Imagine, one last time, the sweep of history. A family huddled in a mud hut, digging a shallow pit. A Roman senator chatting with a neighbor on a marble bench. A monk stepping into a cloistered privy. A Londoner watching the Thames clear after centuries of filth. An astronaut fastening a belt in a space toilet, trusting filters and fans. Across these moments, scattered by millennia, the same act repeats, the same need endures, the same ingenuity rises. It is a chorus of humanity, quiet yet unbroken. The history of waste is, in the end, the history of civilization itself. It teaches us humility, that even the greatest emperor shares the same needs as the humblest farmer. It teaches us ingenuity, that no problem is too small to inspire invention. And it teaches us compassion, that the true test of progress is not in how we honor the powerful, but in how we care for the most ordinary and universal of human acts. So let the last word of this journey be not filth, but foundation. Sanitation is the hidden stone upon which our cities stand, the unseen river that carries us forward. Without it, we falter. With it, we flourish. It is not glamorous, but it is essential, a quiet triumph as old as humanity and as new as tomorrow. And perhaps tonight, as you settle into sleep, you may find comfort in this thought, that beneath the grand sweep of history, beneath the noise of war and empire, there runs a gentler story, the story of how humanity, again and again, has cared enough to clean, to carry away, to make space for life to continue. A story humble, hidden, and profoundly human.